Test, test, test. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call the Board Executive Committee meeting of February 23rd to order. I know by now most people have heard the sad news about losing Ted Hoffman, Mayor Pro Tem from the City of Norco. So I'd like to have a moment of silence, if you don't all mind, in remembrance of him, our colleague for many years, and many committees. Thank you. Thank you so much. Before we begin, please make sure your devices are all on mute so that we don't have any background noise. I know we all miss Art Swissling, but until you're called upon by the clerk to speak, it's respectful. Will the clerk please read the special notice?
Yes, Chair. On September 16th, 2021, Governor Newsom signed Assembly Bill Number 361 that amends and extends certain Brown Act requirements pertaining to telephonic conferencing of local government meetings through January 1st, 2024. As such, RTA has opted to conduct the February 23rd, 2023 Executive Committee meeting via teleconference. Participants can participate via teleconference in each participant's own office or home area, which will not be made physically accessible to the public.
Thank you, Sam. For today's meeting, we'll take roll call. Will the clerk please take the roll call?
City of Cali Mesa.
Yes.
City of Canyon Lake.
Here, sorry.
City of Riverside.
Here.
City of Temecula.
Here.
City of Hemet.
I am here.
And City of Rupa Valley.
Here.
Chair, you have a quorum. Members, please remember to remute your devices.
Okay, will the clerk please take attendance of RTA staff and agency council?
Yes. Kristen Warsinski. Here. Rick Kazarowski.
Here.
Melissa Blankenship.
Here.
Laura Camacho.
Here.
And Cassie Trapezonian.
Here.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, item 3, public comments for non-agenda items. Will the clerk please read the directions for public comments?
Members of the public may address the board regarding any item within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board. However, no action may be taken on off-agenda items unless authorized by law. Comments shall be limited to matters not listed on the agenda. Members of the public may comment on any matter listed on the agenda at the time that the board considers that matter. Each person's presentation is limited to a maximum of 3 minutes.
Has the clerk received any requests to speak?
No, Chair, I have not.
Is there anyone on the line that would like to make a comment? Hearing none, the public comment portion for items not on the agenda is now closed. Item 4, approval of minutes for the January 26th, 2023 Executive Committee meeting. Do any committee members have any comments or corrections? If not, I'll take a motion to approve.
Temecula moves.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Canyon Lake seconds.
Thank you very much. Okay, will the clerk please take roll call?
City of Cali Mesa.
Yes.
City of Canyon Lake.
Aye.
City of Riverside.
Yes.
City of Temecula.
Yes.
City of Hemet.
Yes.
City of Rupa Valley.
I'm going to abstain. I wasn't at that meeting.
Chair, that is 5 yeses.
Thank you. Okay, next is item 5, telephone and virtual conferencing policy for board of directors, committee meetings, and regular meetings. Cassie Trapezonian? Trapezonian.
Got it.
Will present. Thank you.
Yes, good morning, Chair, members of the committee. Cassie Trapezonian. I'm sitting in for the agency's general counsel, Barbara Raylino. I'm just going to give a brief overview of the various teleconferencing options that are now available to the committees and the board as passed by Assembly Bill 2449. So historically, public agencies have had one teleconferencing option, and that has been to go to an off-site location. It could be within the jurisdiction of the agency. It could be outside of its jurisdiction. They have to post an agenda at the location, make sure the location is ADA accessible, and then also is available to the public to participate and make public comment. So that option is still available. It's been around for a long time. It's worked for agencies for a long time. And then, as you know, back during the COVID pandemic, AB 361 was passed, which allowed public agencies to go fully virtually. There was no in-person participation required. And, you know, under those rules, the board had to adopt a resolution every 30 days. As we all know, the state of emergency is supposed to be ending at the end of this month. So agencies can no longer use that to teleconference for the COVID pandemic. Between now and 2024, when this legislation sunsets, should a new state of emergency arise, agencies could utilize that, but for purposes of COVID-19, that's no longer an option. So, you know, meetings going forward will be in person. And then the last and the newest teleconferencing option, which I'm going to spend the most time on, is this AB 2449. Some of you may be familiar with it from your home agencies, but essentially it allows board members, committee members to teleconference in for two reasons. One is just cause, or two is emergency circumstances. So if a board member is going to teleconference in for just cause, they don't have to get approval. They just have to provide notice, and there's very limited reasons what qualify as just cause under the statute. It means a child care or caregiving need, a contagious illness, a need related to a physical or mental disability, or travel while on official business for a public agency. A board member, a committee member is limited to teleconferencing in for just cause to up to 2 times per calendar year. The second reason a board member could teleconference in is for emergency circumstances, which means a physical or family medical emergency that prevents a member from attending in person. And to teleconference in for emergency circumstances, that requires approval by the full board or the committee in which they're going to teleconference. In order to accommodate these types of teleconferencing in, it ultimately has to requires the agency to turn the board meeting or committee meeting into a hybrid virtual meeting. So there has to be a public component to it. So we have to use a platform like Zoom, like we've been doing now, where the public can view the meeting. We have to put a camera in the board or committee meeting room because the public has to be able to see and hear the board or committee members, and the public has to be able to make public comment by that way also. In addition, the board member who is participating remotely, that board member has to be on camera. They have to then announce every person who is in the room with them, who is over 18, and their relationship with that person. And both of these options are limited, either, as I mentioned, for just cause up to 2 times per year, or for emergency circumstances, or just cause combined up to 20% of the regular meetings, or and not longer than 3 consecutive months could they participate remotely. So the item that's going before the committee today for discussion, and that will be discussed at the full board, is basically to present to the board the option of whether to decide to allow the agency to hold a teleconferencing option under this new just cause or emergency circumstances. The recommendation has been to authorize it for the board budget and finance committee, the administrations and operations committee, and the TNOW committees. In order to do so, we've put together a policy, our general counsel has, and the policy is written in a way to help staff facilitate being able to turn an in-person meeting into a hybrid virtual public meeting. Oh, and one important thing I forgot is if there's going to be members who are teleconferencing in, there has to be a quorum of the board members physically in person at the meeting location. So I think when this legislation was introduced, it was meant to be more flexible, but as I went through the process, it got very narrowed, very refined. So, no longer is the option to participate virtually, because it's, too far to drive or you have other obligations. It really is for these very limited childcare, caregiving needs, medical emergency circumstances. The board does not have to authorize teleconferencing in under this AB 2449 options. It is permissive. So really the first question is, would the board want to allow this at all? Just, given that it is a little bit of an administrative burden for staff to turn in-person meetings to these virtual hybrid meetings. If the answer is yes, if the board does want to avail itself of this teleconferencing option, then the second question is whether it's applicable to the full board or just the committees, and then also the board would need to adopt a policy in order to allow staff to turn these in-person meetings to hybrid. In order for staff to be able to accommodate a hybrid public meeting, there's one thing that they did not put in the legislation that would have, I think, helped really accommodate an emergency, and that is that when the agency posts the agenda, it has to post all the different ways the public can access the meeting. So if it's going to be an in-person meeting, we put the in-person meeting location. If it's going to be a hybrid meeting where we have a Zoom component, that has to be published at the time the agenda notice is published, at least 72 hours before the meeting. So in order to allow the agency to meet that 72-hour posting requirement, the policy before the full board today requires members who are going to teleconference for emergency circumstances or just cause to give at least 72 hours of notice. Otherwise, the request would be denied, because otherwise the agency wouldn't be able to add the hybrid virtual Zoom component to it. So that's essentially an overview of the laws that are available today and an overview of the policy. The full policy is in the staff report. So just to bring it back, really there are three options. There is, don't avail yourselves of any teleconferencing other than the original teleconferencing where you're off-site, at a public location, that's always available. Or, allow the board to do this, limit it to the committees, or allow the full board to do it. So I'll open it for questions and let staff weigh in as needed as well.
Thank you, Cassie. Okay, what do you all think? A lot. Everybody's in there. I know.
Brian was first.
Linda, go ahead.
Brian had his hand up first, so I will. Are you sure?
Okay, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
We're getting used to this.
Okay, it just amazes me that I'm going to share some personal opinion on this, that the state is so concerned about greenhouse gases and vehicle miles traveled that something like this would even be brought up at this time. But I have a question when it refers to committee members, especially for T-Now. Everybody that comes to a T-Now meeting would be considered a committee member? Because I mean, the idea of T-Now is reaching out to the public, and to put this, it's so easy for the public now to zoom in on a meeting, and we get more participation, able to spread the word that this is, it's just constricts and restrains everybody from coming to these things. So I guess my question after my little diatribe here is, the public is considered a committee member for T-Now? That's a question.
Okay.
I'll take that one. Thanks, Director Krupa. Barbara and I went back and forth on T-Now specifically because we know that, or what we've heard is that the participation is much better virtually and it's much more accessible to at least have that as an option. What we landed on was there's a couple of options for T-Now. So to answer your question, if the person is a regular attendee, then they would be considered part of the T-Now committee. If they're just visiting for the first time, they would not. So a quorum of T-Now members would be like your chair. I think you have a vice chair, a secretary, and then those community members or board members that attend regularly. And it's a little bit weird, right, for T-Now because it's not well defined like your board or your committee is. We went back and forth on the Brown Act requirement at all for T-Now. Barbara and I did again, and we had a good laugh when we ended up where we ended up because we had this conversation last year. We went in the same circle again. Basically, the board can choose to do a resolution that pulls T-Now back to completely a community meeting. You would not set the meeting schedule, you wouldn't get reports out from the meeting, you wouldn't be compensated for attending the meetings, and it would be truly a community meeting. If you do that, RTA staff can still help put those on, and those could be all virtual. If we want it to be where you're there representing the board and hearing from the community, it has to be a Brown Act meeting, so it falls under these guidelines, which means that the regular members a quorum of them would have to be in person, and the people that weren't in person, which then make it virtual for everybody, would have to have a just cause or emergency circumstance.
Okay, thank you. I may chime in a little bit later, depending on what Brian has to say, and I'm sure other members are going to have comments on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Brian, I'm sorry for.
No problem. That's okay. So first of all, we had, I think, over an hour conversation about this at RCTC at the last meeting. And what I got out of that was that they're treating standing committees one way and ad hoc committees another way. And so, for example, RCTC has, I think, 4 standing committees: executive, the regular board meeting, Western County projects and programs, and I think the toll policy committee. But there's a lot of other committees, but those are all going to be allowed to be virtual. Basically the way we've been doing it for the last 2 years. So if that's the case, could T-Now be considered more of an ad hoc, assuming that the legal counsel for RCTC is correct in the advice that we're getting from RCTC. Everybody's got a little different take on this, and I think we're going to be in troubled waters for a little while until it gets squared away. The other thing that's interesting with this new AB 2449, if you have to give 72 hours, and one of the notice and one of the requirements is that, or one of the excuses is that you're sick or you have a family member who, you can't, you can't get to the meeting for that reason. Well, how are you supposed to know that 72 hours in advance? It doesn't seem like an emergency if that's the case. So to me, it's just, flawed no matter how I'm looking at it or hearing about it. So the other thing is this. With the AB 2449, can anybody use that? Does our RTA, if we say we don't want to have that policy, but one of the board members says, I want to use that because it's available by California law, does that mean that they can force the issue? And if so, we would have to be prepared for every meeting scenario as optionally virtual, is my guess. So anyway, those are my thoughts at this point, and maybe staff has some more clarifications that you can add.
Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, I can jump in on that last question. That really is the purpose of bringing the policy before the board today, is that we're bringing it to the board to say, here's what the law says, here are some of the options, here are the challenges, what does the board want to do? If the board says, yes, we'll allow 2449 for committees only, then if a board member requested to do it for a board meeting in the future, we would have to deny that request because 1, the board acted that way, and 2, we wouldn't be set up to handle a virtual hybrid public meeting.
Yeah, so to summarize, Chair, if I may, my understanding from meeting with Barbara and with Cassie is that this is not, it's permissive, it's not a requirement. We don't have to, there's nothing that requires that we allow people these options. These are only if the board decides to allow these options. So I don't think that there would be any avenue for them to push that it's allowable under state law, because it's up to the board to decide if they want to allow it or not. It's a local decision. As far as T-Now being ad hoc, Barbara and I did discuss that, and again, her concerns were that it's a standing scheduled meeting. It's not an ad hoc committee by definition. She says it's a standing scheduled meeting, and maybe the ones at RCTC are set up differently. I'm not familiar. And then it also has continuing subject matter jurisdiction and board members representing the board. So those are her concerns with T-Now. And again, if we restructured, then we could make it virtual and a community meeting, but it would require some changes.
So it seems to me that where it was, there seemed to be more options with 2449. Now it seems it's very restricted. And it would be difficult for staff to accommodate everyone, and I think it would leave us open for a lot of challenges. And I think we had all pretty much agreed about committees remaining virtual and full board in person. So I don't know, are there any other thoughts on this? Yes, Zach.
Thanks, Chair. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of bashing AB 2449 too much, but it doesn't make any sense. We've been doing a very decent job, good job, I would even argue, over the last 3 years. Public participation isn't hindered in any way, but this is kind of unfortunate. I am curious, at SCAG, the board did adopt this and is giving that option, but that board is a massive board, so it's I'm curious, Brian, what RCTC decided to do.
So at least the takeaway that we got from the last meeting was that the 4 standing committees will be in-person meetings, and the other committee meetings are all going to be virtual.
All right. I mean, I think logistically, like, the virtual stuff is so difficult, and it creates problems, obviously, on the staff side, and having video monitors and other things now that are required. I mean, my personal feeling is I'm annoyed that I'm going to have to now spend some time in the car and drive up there. But you know, we've been doing it. We did it for a while, and I guess I'm okay going back. I just think maybe the creating a virtual option is just is going to create too many issues, especially with the 72-hour notice and things like that. So maybe I would suggest we just go full in person in the board. And does the virtual requirements for the 2 committees, is that problematic from a staff perspective, or is that a little bit easier than the full board?
It's easier. There's less members. We would have the committee here at RTA, and then, you know, be able to easily virtually handle if people are joining in that way, just because we have all the equipment here to do that. That's what we're doing right now. For the full board, and you experienced it that one time when you were chair, it was pretty hectic. The county is, you know, we're using their space, and it wasn't my preferred option for full board, and I believe our CTC has similar circumstances from what Ann said. But for committees, it can be done. If we need to do it, we can definitely make it work.
Yeah, the full board was very difficult. Just as for T-Now, to just close the loop on that from my perspective, I certainly enjoy attending as many meetings as possible. If they go back to in-person, my attendance will go to 0. I mean, there's just no way you can get to them all. You know, a compensation aside, I do enjoy attending those meetings. So maybe there is a conversation of creating that just into a more community-led kind of thing, so we can keep the participation up. I mean, it's been years, but there were some meetings that you had a decent attendance, and others where it was like 2 people sitting around with a lunch, and Jim was like, you know, had sandwiches for days left over. So Maybe that's a conversation for a later date, or those are just my thoughts on the T-Now.
Thank you, Zach. I know I attended a lot more meetings with it being virtual because you didn't have to drive. And it's interesting because all the T-Nows are a little different. So it's good information to have all of that available. Linda, you had a comment?
Yes. And part of the issue for me is that there seems to be a different take from each legal firm. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, Zach, that SCAG's last notice to us was that for March, we could do policy committee. Well, we're meeting jointly, that's what it is. So policy and regional council can be remote, but then in March or in April, policy committees could meet virtually, but regional council had to be in person. And I'm thinking that makes no sense either. So it's almost like there's a different take depending on who reads it, comes up with their own interpretation of it. And with all of these options, I mean, it's crazy. You can go and go, that one would be really, really good, but oops, item C in there kind of contradicts item A. So it's counterproductive for locals, let's put it that way. It may work in Sacramento, but it's not working out here.
Thank you for your comments. Has the clerk received any requests to speak on this item?
No, Chair, I have not.
Okay. So is there anyone on the line that would like to make a comment? Okay, so do we have a motion to approve on this item?
I'll make a motion to approve this and move it to the full board because I'm sure there's going to be good conversation with the full board.
Yes.
I'll second
Okay,
that.
thank you. Is that? Okay, will the clerk please take roll call?
City of Cali Mesa.
Yes.
City of Canyon Lake.
Aye.
City of Riverside.
Yes.
City of Temecula.
Yes.
City of Hemet.
Yes.
And City of Harupa Valley.
Yes.
Chair, it's unanimous.
Thank you all for that. Motion is passed. Okay, so our next item, number 6, is a closed session item. And it's a closed session item will be held pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9, Item D, Item 2, conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, one matter. We will now move to closed session at 1:27.
We are all back here.
Okay, okay, thank you. Okay, next item is item 7, the next meeting. The next meeting of the,
Sorry, we need to report out.
oh, I'm sorry. Of course we do. We have to, legal counsel has to report out on this item.
Oh, there's actually no report out today.
Okay, thank you. Okay, our next item is item 7. Our next meeting of the executive committee is scheduled for Thursday, March 23rd at 1 p.m. The meeting will adjourn at 1:43. We'll see you in just a few minutes for a full board.